The most dangerous moment in any human life is not when you face external enemies or physical threats, but when you first glimpse the bars of the cage you've been living in your entire existence. This isn't about rebellion or rejection of society. This is about the profound moment when your soul recognizes that everything you've been taught to pursue, every role you've been assigned to play, every identity you've carefully constructed, is nothing more than a costume in a play you never consciously chose to enter. You're sitting in a restaurant, perhaps, surrounded by the familiar hum of conversation, and suddenly you see it all differently. The businessman at the corner table, frantically checking his phone, chasing numbers that will never be enough. The couple arguing in hushed tones about mortgage payments and vacation plans, their love buried beneath the debris of societal expectations. The teenager scrolling endlessly through manufactured moments of happiness, searching for validation in the approval of strangers. And you realize, with a clarity that feels both liberating and terrifying, that you've been sleepwalking through the same mechanical motions, pursuing the same hollow victories, wearing the same mask of contentment, while your authentic self suffocated beneath layers of conditioning. Joseph Campbell understood this moment intimately. He called it the first stage of the hero's journey, the disruption of the ordinary world. But what Campbell recognized, and what most people never allow themselves to see, is that this disruption doesn't come from external circumstances. It comes from within, from that ancient part of your being that remembers who you were before the world told you who you should become. The ordinary world isn't just your physical environment. It's the entire matrix of beliefs, expectations, and automatic behaviors that keep you trapped in patterns that serve everyone except your soul. You wake up, check your phone, rush to work, perform your assigned tasks, consume your designated entertainment, seek your prescribed pleasures, and collapse into bed, only to repeat the cycle tomorrow. And somewhere deep inside, that voice that Campbell called the call to adventure begins to whisper. But here's what makes this moment so dangerous. Once you hear that whisper, once you glimpse the possibility that life could be lived differently, you can never fully return to unconsciousness. The spell has been broken. You begin to notice things that others seem unable to see. The way people's faces light up when they talk about their dreams, then dim when they return to discussing their obligations. The way conversations follow predictable scripts, touching only the surface of what it means to be human. The way entire industries exist to keep you distracted from the fundamental questions of existence. Who am I really? What am I here to do? What would happen if I stopped playing the game everyone expects me to play? This is where Campbell's wisdom becomes not just theoretical but urgently practical. He understood that the hero's journey isn't a metaphor for external adventure. It's a map for internal transformation. The moment you begin to question the assumptions that everyone around you accepts without examination, you've already stepped onto the path. You've already begun to separate from the tribe, not out of arrogance or superiority, but out of necessity. Your soul is calling you towards something more authentic, more aligned, more alive. And like every hero in every mythic story ever told, you face the same fundamental choice. Answer the call or spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. The ordinary world feels safe because it's familiar, because everyone else seems to be following the same script, because the rules are clear and the rewards are predictable. But Campbell knew something that the ordinary world doesn't want you to discover. Safety is the most dangerous illusion of all. Because while you're busy playing it safe, while you're following the prescribed path and meeting other people's expectations, your authentic self is dying a slow death. The person you were meant to become, the gifts you were meant to share, the life you were meant to live, all of it withers away in the name of security and social acceptance. And so the call comes, sometimes as a whisper, sometimes as a shout, sometimes as a crisis that shatters your carefully constructed world. But however it arrives, it always asks the same question. Are you ready to leave the known world behind and venture into the mystery of who you really are? The call to adventure rarely arrives as a dramatic external event, though Campbell knew it could manifest that way. More often it comes as a growing sense of restlessness, a feeling that the life you've built, however successful it might appear to others, is somehow not your life at all. You find yourself standing in your beautifully appointed home, surrounded by all the things you thought you wanted, and feeling like a stranger in your own existence. You look at your calendar, packed with obligations and appointments, and wonder when you stopped choosing your days and started simply surviving them. This is the mythic moment Campbell described as the soul's refusal to continue the charade, not the charade of civilization itself, but the charade of living as if your current role is the totality of who you are. But here's what Campbell understood about this stage of the journey that most people miss. The call to adventure isn't calling you toward something external. It's not asking you to quit your job, abandon your family, or retreat to a monastery in the mountains. The adventure it's calling you toward is far more profound and far more challenging than any external quest could ever be. It's calling you to discover who you are when you strip away all the identities you've accumulated, all the roles you've been playing, all the stories you've been telling yourself about what your life should look like. It's calling you to meet yourself, perhaps for the first time, without the protective armor of social expectations and cultural conditioning. This internal adventure is simultaneously the most natural thing in the world and the most terrifying. Natural because your authentic self has been waiting patiently beneath all the layers of conditioning, ready to emerge the moment you stop suffocating it with other people's definitions of success and happiness. Terrifying because stepping into authenticity means stepping away from the crowd. And stepping away from the crowd means accepting a kind of solitude that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Campbell called this crossing the threshold, the moment when you choose to venture from the known world into the mysterious territory of your own unexplored depths. What happens in this space between worlds is something Campbell described with profound insight. You discover that the loneliness you feared isn't loneliness at all, it's solitude. And solitude, unlike loneliness, isn't empty. It's pregnant with possibility. In solitude, you begin to hear voices that the noise of the ordinary world drowns out, not the voices of madness, but the voices of wisdom that have been trying to reach you your entire life. The voice of your intuition, which knows things your rational mind hasn't figured out yet. The voice of your creativity, which sees connections and possibilities that conventional thinking can't perceive. The voice of your deepest knowing, which understands that the path to authentic living has never been a group journey. This is why Campbell insisted that the hero must often journey alone, at least initially. Not because connection with others isn't important, it's essential, but because you can only offer authentic connection when you've first connected authentically with yourself. The relationships you build from this place of inner knowing are qualitatively different from the relationships you maintain to avoid loneliness or gain social approval. They're based on genuine recognition rather than mutual need, on shared exploration rather than shared escape, on the joy of witnessing another person's authentic self rather than the relief of having your false self validated. But I want to invite you into something here. If you're feeling the stirrings of this call in your own life, if you're reading these words and recognizing something familiar in this description of restlessness and longing, if you're beginning to suspect that the life you've built might not be the life you're meant to live, then you're already part of a community larger than you might imagine. You're part of the fellowship of seekers, the tribe of questioners, the gathering of souls who refuse to accept that human existence is meant to be a series of mechanical responses to external demands. Consider subscribing not just to this channel, but to this ancient invitation to live more fully. Share in the comments what your own call to adventure has looked like, not because I need your engagement, but because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear, to take their own first step across the threshold. We're not building an audience here. We're building a circle of fellow travelers, each on our own unique journey, but walking in the same direction, toward authenticity, toward meaning, toward the person we came here to become. Once you've accepted the call and crossed the threshold into this new territory of authentic living, Campbell knew that the real work begins. And the first thing you discover, often with a mixture of relief and dismay, is that you're not the first person to take this journey. The path toward authenticity is ancient, worn smooth by countless feet of those who came before you, yet somehow each person must walk it alone, making their own unique discoveries along the way. The tests that await you in this territory are unlike any challenges you faced in the ordinary world, because they're not designed to help you succeed according to external standards. They're designed to reveal who you are when all external validation falls away. The first test is the test of solitude itself. Campbell understood that most people are so afraid of being alone with themselves that they'll accept almost any level of inauthenticity to avoid it. They'll stay in relationships that have long since died, pursue careers that drain their souls, maintain friendships based on habit rather than genuine affection, all to avoid the profound terror of discovering who they are when no one is watching, when no one is judging, when no one is there to tell them whether they're doing it right. But in the hero's journey, solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. In the silence between your thoughts, in the space between your heartbeats, in the pause between your inhalation and exhalation, you begin to hear the voice of your own wisdom. And once you've learned to trust that voice, you discover something remarkable. You're never truly alone, because you're finally in relationship with yourself. The second test is more subtle, but perhaps more challenging. Learning to discern between the voices of genuine wisdom and the voices of spiritual ego. Campbell was acutely aware of this danger, having observed countless seekers who escaped the prison of social conditioning, only to trap themselves in new forms of superiority and self-righteousness. The person who sees through society's illusions can become intoxicated with their own insight, forgetting that seeing clearly is meant to increase compassion, not create separation. True spiritual maturity, Campbell taught, reveals itself not in the ability to judge others' unconsciousness, but in the capacity to hold space for everyone's journey with infinite patience and understanding. The awakened person doesn't stand above the crowd pointing out their blindness. They move through the world as a gentle presence, offering by their very being an invitation to greater aliveness. But it's in what Campbell called the approach to the inmost cave that the most profound test awaits. Here, in the deepest part of your inner journey, you encounter the shadows you've spent your entire life avoiding, not just the obvious shadows of anger or fear or shame, but the more subtle shadows of spiritual pride, of the need to be special, of the attachment to being the one who sees what others don't. You discover that even your awakening can become another identity to cling to, another way of avoiding the radical vulnerability of simply being human. The inmost cave is the place where you must release even your attachment to being awakened, where you must die to every version of yourself you've ever constructed, including the version that fancies itself enlightened. And yet, it's precisely in this space of ultimate surrender that you discover the allies Campbell wrote about, not necessarily external mentors or companions, though those may appear, but the inexhaustible resources of your own being. Your capacity for joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. Your ability to love that doesn't require reciprocation. Your sense of purpose that emerges not from external achievement, but from the simple fact of your existence. These allies have been with you all along, but you couldn't access them while you were busy being someone else, while you were performing for an audience that was never really paying attention anyway. If you're recognizing your own journey in these words, if you're feeling both the terror and the exhilaration of this path toward authenticity, I want you to know that your courage matters more than you might realize. Every person who chooses to live authentically gives others permission to do the same. Your willingness to face your own shadows makes it easier for others to face theirs. Your commitment to being real in a world that rewards pretense is a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. Share with us where you are on this journey. What shadows are you learning to embrace? What allies are you discovering within yourself? Your story isn't just yours. It's part of the larger story of human awakening that's been unfolding for millennia, and it matters more than you know. The final stage of Campbell's hero's journey is often misunderstood, particularly in our culture's obsession with dramatic endings and clear resolutions. The return isn't a triumphant homecoming where the hero is celebrated and everything returns to normal. Instead, it's something far more subtle and far more challenging. Learning to live in the ordinary world while carrying the extraordinary wisdom gained in the depths of authentic self-discovery. Campbell knew that this integration is perhaps the most difficult part of the entire journey, because it requires you to embody what you've learned without losing it, to share your insights without diminishing them, to remain connected to your deepest truth while engaging fully with a world that often seems to have forgotten such truth exists. The person who returns from this inner journey carries what Campbell called the elixir, not a magical potion, but a way of being that has the power to heal others simply through its presence. But here's the paradox. The more profound your transformation, the less dramatic it may appear to others. You don't return from authentic self-discovery with superpowers or special abilities. You return with something far more powerful and far more practical, the capacity to be fully present to whatever life brings, without needing it to be different than it is. You return with the ability to love without attachment, to work without desperation, to succeed without arrogance, to fail without devastation. You return as someone who has learned the difference between being in the world and being of the world. This is why Campbell insisted that the hero's journey isn't about escaping the ordinary world. It's about transforming your relationship to it. You still go to work, but you're no longer working to prove your worth or escape your mortality. You still form relationships, but you're no longer seeking in others what you've learned to find within yourself. You still face challenges and disappointments, but they no longer threaten your fundamental sense of who you are. The external circumstances of your life may look remarkably similar to what they were before your journey began, but you inhabit them from a completely different center of gravity. And this, Campbell understood, is how real change happens in the world. Not through dramatic gestures or revolutionary manifestos, but through the quiet transformation of individual consciousness, one person at a time. When you live from authentic presence rather than reactive conditioning, you create a field of possibility around you that others can feel even if they can't name it. Your peace becomes their permission to stop fighting battles that were never theirs to fight. Your joy becomes their reminder that happiness doesn't have to be earned or achieved. It can simply be chosen, moment by moment, as a way of moving through the world. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this return is what Campbell called the freedom to live. This isn't freedom from responsibility or commitment, quite the opposite. It's the freedom that comes from knowing who you are so clearly that you no longer need to spend energy defending, justifying, or promoting yourself. It's the freedom that emerges when you stop trying to become someone and start expressing who you already are. It's the freedom of no longer needing life to validate your existence, because you've learned to validate it from within. This freedom isn't selfish. It's the most generous gift you can offer the world. Because when you're no longer driven by unconscious needs and fears, when you're no longer trying to get something from others to fill the emptiness inside yourself, you become capable of authentic service. Not service born from guilt or obligation, but service that flows naturally from the recognition that your well-being and everyone else's well-being are intimately connected. You serve not because you should, but because in the deepest part of yourself, you can't do otherwise. Campbell spent his life studying the mythic patterns that connect all human cultures, and what he discovered is that the journey toward authenticity isn't optional. It's the fundamental purpose of human existence. We're all called to this adventure of becoming who we really are, beneath all the layers of conditioning and expectation. Some answer the call consciously, embracing the challenges and rewards of intentional transformation. Others resist until life forces the journey upon them through crisis or loss, or the simple accumulation of years of living inauthentically. But whether we choose it or have it chosen for us, the journey toward authentic selfhood is the one adventure that every human life offers. And when you accept that adventure, when you commit to discovering and expressing who you really are, everything changes. Not because your external world necessarily transforms, but because you transform, and you discover that you were never separate from that world at all. You were always the universe expressing itself as you, and the journey home is simply the journey to remember that truth.